Okay, so today we'll talk about two architects, Albert Kahn and Marcello Piacentini. One died on the day of 8th of December. The other one was born on the day of December, of 8th of December. So let's start with Albert Kahn, not to be confounded with Louis Kahn. They both have the same family name, but they are very different architects. Although Albert Kahn was also a very good architect, a very interesting architect, and he deserves to be known. So let's read. He died on December 8th, but he was born in March 1869. So he was, let me see if I can count, 19 years older than Louis Le Corbusier, 18 years, because Le Corbusier was born in 1887. So he was an American industrial architect. Well, we'll talk about what that means. He was accredited the architect of Detroit and designed industrial plant complexes such as the Ford River Rouge automobile complex. He designed the construction of Detroit skyscrapers and office buildings, as well as mansions in the city suburbs. So the description that he was an industrial architect is not correct. He built actually many things, you know, including in cemeteries and villas and so on. He was an architect. He led an organization of hundreds of architect associates, and in 1937 designed 19% of all architect designed industrial factories in the United States. Under a unique contract in 1929, Kahn established a design and training office in Moscow, sending 25 staff there to train Soviet architects and engineers, and to design hundreds of industrial buildings under their first 5-year plan. So this means there are many buildings by Albert Kahn in Russia. They trained more than 4,000 architects and engineers using Kahn's concepts. In 1943, the Franklin Institute posthumously awarded Kahn the Frank P. Brown Medal. This was the man inspecting, doing some shop drawings, as they are called in the States, you know, inspecting the working drawings and making necessary corrections. I love his phone there. I wish I had such a phone instead of my miserable mobile phone. He doesn't look too happy. He probably discovered some mistakes there. Anyway, here he is happier. I guess he solved the problems on those plans. Anyway, an architect today looks a little bit different than he did. You know, the offices are very different, but he was a very, very successful architect. The architecture of Albert Kahn. Okay, the architect of Detroit, as he is called, because he built many things in Detroit, and indeed, he's like, you know, like Palladio in Florenza or Eric Owen Moss in Culver City. Some drawings by Albert Kahn. Well, mostly, you know, these are not speculative drawings. These are so-called real drawings, construction drawings for buildings which were built. He was an architect. He was not, you know, an illusionist, or how do you say it? He was not a paper architect. He was a builder, and in the most serious, convincing way, or, you know, meaning of the word. You know, I couldn't even find sketches. You know, you can find plenty of sketches of Le Corbusier, let's say, or Frank Lloyd Wright and so on. He didn't work with those, you know, genius strokes, you know, like Eric Mendelssohn or, you know, Le Corbusier or Wright. No, he was a doer and a builder, a man with his feet on earth, but you'll see some of his buildings. He even built the Futurama in the World Exhibit in 1939 in New York. And I actually, although he is very different from the type of architect or intellectual that I like and admire, exactly because of it, I somehow feel attracted by it. You know, opposites attract, I guess. Anyway, Albert Kahn Associates, 1905. Um, he was, during his time, one of the most important architects in the United States, and yet he's not well known. And I think he deserves to be well known, and you'll see why, because he did build some good buildings. Um, anyway, you see his drawings have rigor. They are rigorous, they are precise, but they also have a certain sensitivity. And you'll be surprised to see that this man was called the industrial architect, actually built even a very romantic arts and craft large villa, and maybe more than one. One of them, maybe the most famous, I will present here. Maybe because I don't have a lot of practical abilities, I admire those who have them, and it seems he did have them. But the practical abilities of Albert Kahn didn't, make him, less gifted for having even what is called the vision. And you see, some of his buildings are actually very powerful. Emotionally speaking, aesthetically speaking. Now we start with the Fisher Building in Detroit, USA. And this is a building which was built by a city which was very proud and very potent economically. And the building expresses a great desire for cultural emancipation. We saw just a few days ago when I talked about John Portman, the Renaissance Center in Detroit. This one by the Fisher Building by Albert Kahn is, in my opinion, more sensitive, although on a grandiose scale, because Detroit, you know, well, it was the city that brought to the world what I call the calamity of the T Ford, invention, the car. But the car, promised paradise on earth to so many people, and still does, although it's known it pollutes vehemently the whole earth. The building, the Fisher Building by Albert Kahn, is though a building which is mammoth, is huge, it's American, it's North American. Clearly, this building cannot be seen in Europe easily, but we cannot deny that it has certain aesthetical qualities. It's powerful, it's Gothic in a way. It's, it aspires towards the high, towards the above. And, just try to imagine how this building was built, with how much effort, with how much money, with how many resources. This is, just to arrive here, this height, and it's from 1905. So from 115 years, 17 years ago. You'll see the interiors, they are impressive. And this was built by an architect who, by many, is unknown. Okay, this is the drawing, fragments, because such a big, I'm joking, but such a big building cannot be easily compressed on a piece of paper. Of course it can, doesn't matter. Even the ambitious tallest buildings of Dubai, even they can make it on any drawing by reducing them, of course. Anyway, Fisher Building, and we are soon going to see how the building looks also inside. You see, this is a building which at that time didn't sever the relationships with what we call the past. What is perhaps strange, maybe it's not strange, is that an architect of our time, rather young, still young, Mark Foster Gage, is kind of trying to reclaim something of that time in towers or buildings that he's promoting now, 120 years later or 110 years later. This is a glorious building, even though you might not sympathize a lot with this so-called style, but you cannot contest its richness. I mean, look at this. I mean, yes, it's historicist, and it is decorative also. It is ornamental, and the ornaments derive from various, past architectures. You don't quite know where from, but I like the fact that the so-called industrial architect indulged in very, informed ornamental work. So would you describe the author of this building as being an industrial architect? Although you will see some giant industrial buildings built by Albert Kahn, and quite convincing. But he was an interesting architect. And well, I included this picture because it amuses me that such an activity takes place within the Fisher building in Detroit by Albert Kahn. There are certain things which I like about the United States, is that they are open-minded, and that they welcome even eccentric activities like what we look at now. The building itself is majestic. It's a building which pays homage to its majesty, the car, and the money that came into Detroit thanks to it. He was in very good terms with General Motors, and of course, that's where the headquarters were, in Detroit. But now a town like Flint, which is like 1 hour drive from Detroit, is in total economic misery because all the jobs in this huge economic and production sector of the United States, the car manufacturing, the jobs were exported to China. And the city of Flint collapsed economically, and so did the city of Detroit. In fact, a few years ago, the Venice Biennial in architecture was exactly the American pavilion. The North American pavilion showed projects for Detroit, attempting to bring back to life this city, which at one moment was the 5th most important city in the United States. And, for a good number of years now, the past 10, 15, 20 years, it became a ruin. Of course, the Fisher building still stands, but you could have bought a beautiful villa in Detroit for almost no money, $1,000 or $1,500. I myself bought a house for my daughter, jokingly in a way, with $200 in Flint, not in Detroit. I never went there, and we probably lost it. But it amused me, to buy a house with $200 with 2 entrances. I used to tell my daughter, Anna, the shadow of the tree in front of the house costs more, or should cost more, values more than what we pay for this house. It was a strange phenomenon, because the whole area collapsed because the jobs went to China and other countries. So this kind of building was built when the economy was flourishing, and flourishing dramatically, because of as I said, the T model, the God-sent T model by Mr. Ford, which look what they built. You say you are here in a majestic, it's also something Islamic here a little bit, this ornamentation actually deserves attention. It's a cultural provocation. I find it actually interesting. You know, looking at this, you could almost claim that it's also some kind of a religious building. It's not, but it's well built. It's done with opulence, with affluence, with look at it. Albert Kahn, the industrial architect, if you can believe it or not. Look at the ceiling there, you know. I mean, you know, the best buildings in Europe cannot afford something like this. And they did there in Detroit. And look at this. Albert Kahn. I think just the six of us or five here, we are the only ones who know about Albert Kahn in the whole of Romania. This is what I believe. I don't think there are others. I really don't. I myself, I found out about Albert Kahn not too long ago. I don't know, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, you know, something like this. Now, yes, you know, this is not a dramatically modern architecture, but no one could say that it's not a good architecture. I think it is a good architecture. And, you know, in as much as I like the avant-garde and I like provocations and I like Eric Owen Moss and Sue Fujimoto, I also like this kind of buildings. You know, if they are built well, and, you know, there is a lot to discover here. And I think a lot of that has to do with the richness of the ornamentation. Although you saw the building from the outside, is a, you know, a very, you know, convincing building in terms of, you know, heaviness and rigidity and tallness, I mean, height. But inside, the building surprises one through its you know, chromatic richness and ornamental richness and so on. Look at this. You know, maybe even the Cathedral of Mântuirea Neamului would not afford such exquisite details. Or look here, that's where the elevators are, I think. You know, it's splendid, no? It's very possible Cosimo de' Medici would have loved it from his Florentine Renaissance. Because, you know, you also have to understand, this was the Brave New World, but the Brave New World was composed mostly of people coming from Europe, and they carried with them nostalgia. It was a nostalgia for a culture that Europe had and which had to do with the past. So many people once arrived, you know, in North America, they wanted to quickly build a convincing culture, a rich culture, and they looked for stimulation in Europe most of the time, and they found it. I'm absolutely sure Albert Kahn had books, you know, precious books, you know, with the best architecture of the world. And architects sometimes, at least sometimes, they inspire themselves from other examples and other architectures and so on. Look at this. The industrial architect, if you can believe it. Forget about the fact that he built hundreds, if not thousands, of factories. He was also a skilled architect in this kind of architecture, which should not be called this kind of architecture, but architecture. Look at it. He also built this building. It's not that he built only this. He also built this, and we have to acknowledge it's a strong building, this one as well. You know, it's a building which, if this was built in Europe, would have been considered, you know, very, very, very highly. It's considered highly in Detroit too, but, you know, who talks about it? Anyway, the General Motors building in Detroit, here it is, because we just saw it. You know, the king, the true king, General Motors. In Flint, where I bought that that house with 200, it was probably burned by fire, or I don't know. I cannot imagine it was otherwise. But from the outside, there were no signs of fire or anything. It seemed okay. The problem is that that city is totally desolate because of the reasons I mentioned. There was the headquarters in Flint, the headquarters of Cadillac, also General Motors. So look at them. Just read here, motors. Motors, yes, motors. The motors produce this immense wealth that made such buildings possible, and in a very short time. Is this a bad building? I wouldn't say it is. No, it has force. It has strength. It is the strength of a capitalism which seemed unstoppable. General Motors, and Albert Kahn was the right man at the right time. From what I read, many artists moved into the Detroit area because they heard that, you know, it was very possible to buy a house for almost nothing, where the rents were very, very low. So now you have the paradoxical fact that Detroit, which was not really, you know, an artistic city, was a production city related to Ford and to the General Motors activities and cars, now has many artists. I like this actually, you know, so the city was dying, and the artists who are, many of them are probably necrophiliacs, like Leonardo, who apparently was even, you know, judged, so to speak, in a court because he had a unusual, not to call it otherwise, attraction towards dead bodies. The artists also, you know, moved into Detroit, and they fed on the dying city, so to speak. Interesting case, actually, and it deserves to be studied further. Maybe I will make one day a presentation. Maybe one of you will make a presentation about Detroit. You see the Cadillac place. Wow. You know, forget about Louis Le Soleil. Louis is the Sun King. We are talking about Cadillac. Can you imagine what force, monetary force, these activities had? And the buildings show clearly that there was no limit of money. You know, they were able to do anything because the cars were produced continuously. The production line was active day and night, day and night. In the United States, the train is very undeveloped or underdeveloped, although at one moment, you know, it was important, the transportation by train, but not any longer, because the car and the car manufacturers do not want to lose customers. So only the very poor people use the train in the United States. And the train is very, very slow and rather depressing. I myself took once the train from New York to Denver, Colorado, through Chicago. It took me, if you believe it, it took me 2 days and 2 nights, 48 hours in the 20th century. Anyway, look at the building. It's a palace. It's the, you know, building for the General Motors company in Detroit, Albert Kahn architect, as you can see at the bottom. China now is, you know, in a way similar to the whole Detroit. The whole of China is similar to Detroit. They build now because the economy is incredible, and yes, it's a limitless possibility there. Anyway, now we look at a different building by Albert Kahn, unexpected actually, Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory. Again, would you say that this is a bad architect? No, I wouldn't say so. He was a good architect. If there was anything wrong with Albert Kahn, it was only one thing, that his family name is identical with that of Louis Kahn. But otherwise, he was an excellent architect. And you can see quite versatile, and you didn't yet see his industrial buildings. Now, I don't know about that bench, but let's look at the building. It's good. It's a good building. You know, it reminds me of the greenhouse in the on the the site plan of Schönbrunn in Vienna and other great greenhouses. It's a fine building. Anyway, moving forward, the Edsel and Eleanor Ford house. Ford, forget about the other two. This is the Ford family, you know, Edsel and his wife Eleanor. And look at what house Albert Kahn built for them. Wow. This is Victorian Great Britain. The 19th century is splendid. No, I mean, look at this. You know, it's impossible for me not to smile or laugh, because this is the industrial architect. What industrial architect? This man was able to, he was a man of many hats. Obviously, he would build anything, you know, and we'll see the Futurama, and we'll see also the industrial buildings, but this has nothing to do with industrial architecture. This is a great, you know, mansion built for a royal family, the Ford family, with stone and slate for the roof, and covered with beautiful ivy, and even during the winter is impressive. You can imagine how it is inside. In a way, the fact that he was able to work for very large commissions and also industrial buildings helped him in the domestic architecture as well. Because you see, the architecture has a vigor. It is vigorous, and maybe that vigor derives from him being able to handle very large and also industrial buildings. Who would say that this is not paradise on earth? I would say it is. And again, the source of this paradise is the car. Its Majesty, the car, the T model of Mr. Ford. I have a presentation myself. I made one about the, I think, was it called Heidegger and the T car, the T model or something? Anyway, Kenneth Frampton believes, and he is not the only one, that the car destroyed the city. And it's very possible it did. But this building was also, you know, is based on Its Majesty the car. The money came from the car. Do you see any car here? No. It's just nature, splendid trees, splendid sky, splendid everything. I hope I have some images from the inside, and now I'm curious myself. I made this presentation a few years ago, and I didn't look through it. No, I don't have. I'm really very, very sorry. Maybe, I don't know. I can't explain it, that I don't have images from the inside, but you can imagine. You have enough imagination to imagine how it is inside. The Cranbrook House and Garden. A different building from the previous one, not totally different, but even this one, I think, has a level of seriousness and sensitivity, and I would say it's rather surprising for an industrial architect, as he was called. I'm smiling, of course. Albert Kahn. Now we arrive at something very, 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 very different. The Futurama, New York World's Fair from 1939, where he worked with Norman Bell Gates. 1939, we already talked about it some, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or so. when I presented the works of Wallace Harrison, and I showed the Trilon and the Perisphere, also part of the New York World's Fair from 1939. But Mr. Kahn, who had a very good relationship with General Motors and with Ford, was of course working for them. Look, Futurama, this is, can you believe it? The same architect who did you know, that Victorian large mansion for the Ford family built this indeed futuristic building, even by today's standards. Just try to imagine the scale, because you see here, of course, there was no pandemic at that time. Well, the pandemic was before, with about 20 years, in 1918, but this is 1939. It just look how many people are waiting to enter the Futurama. What was the Futurama? It was some kind of a vision promoted by the car manufacturers. Its Majesty, I'm aware, 3 or 4 times I use the words Its Majesty, General Motors. It was this incredible belief still in 1939 that the car will save the world. Forget Dostoevsky, who said beauty will save the world. No, no. These people believed what General Motors believed. The car will save the world. And it might be that the car is actually ruining the world because it's obviously polluting the air. Look at them. Just look at them, you know, I mean, they are everywhere. And yes, in a way they are beautiful, in a way they are enticing, you know. But if you don't think about the consequences, if you don't see the larger picture, you are impressed. Of course, they move, they actually move. You take your wife and your or your husband and the kids, and you enter this miracle on 4 wheels, and there you go, somewhere, wherever you want to go. Of course, he worked for the Highways and Horizons building, 1939 New York World's Fair. Now let's reflect a little on the meaning of the words, highways and horizons. Well, of course, the highway is moving towards the horizon. And of course, the implication is that the infinite is actually reachable. The absolute, in a way. God himself, paradise, the highway. So let's read. It has always been man's wish to look into the future. It's easy to fantasize about a distant future filled with striking, utopic or utopian inventions. Either way, no one will be alive to see if they will come true, but it's hard to imagine such innovations happening in a short time. This was the hard task General Motors embraced when it decided to promote the Highways and Horizons exhibit, also known as Futurama, at the World's Fair in New York City in 1939. The goal was to show what the world would be like in 20 years, that is, in 1960. At the end, the audience would get a badge that proudly stated, "I saw the future." What they didn't see was that in a very, very alarmingly short time, the Second World War started. So much about the capacity of human beings to envision or to so-called see the future. But it's true, there was a grandiose dreaming here, you know. It's just that if we reflect on history, on what happened then in 1939, and we know what happened not much later, it's clear that we human beings are not totally in control of our destiny. No, no, we start wars, who knows on what premises, the deadliest wars. You know, let's not forget, just 6 years later, Nagasaki and Hiroshima were bombed. You know, to say tragically is not to say enough, with atomic bombs. Was this seen at the Futurama? Of course it was not seen. Was it seen or mentioned that the cars pollute and that the climate might change, 50, 60, 70 years later? No. We only saw the bright side of things and we didn't see the less bright side things. Yes, this building is intriguing and powerful and mysterious in a way. And yes, it has a futurist, well, if we don't think of Marinetti now, but in the sense of it belongs to the future. And the people are flocking there. But again, what happened just some years later had nothing to do with what was envisioned here and described. Look at these people looking upon the future. In the city which became a ruin at the beginning of the 21st century. Look at them, they're all very well dressed, they look intelligent, they look understanding, they look curious, civilized people in a powerful country contemplating a magnificent future. And just almost months later, the deadliest war started, the Second World War. So Detroit, no, this is New York City, it's not Detroit. But what I'm trying to say is, how come that there is no anticipation? How come that we so get carried away by dreaming that we can achieve that so-called horizon far away, which must be splendid with our magnificent cars, and we don't see the other side of things? How come? How come we are so blind, actually? In essence, so unknowing. Yes, this was splendid, of course, but there is a but, B-U-T. GM, not to be forgotten, GM, General Motors. Now, the Ford Rotunda, the Ford Media Center, also designed by this industrial architect who also designs, Victorian buildings, is this building. Even this building, I wouldn't dismiss as being uninteresting. I think it is interesting, and I think it is well done. Sorry about the pictures. I wish I had better pictures, but still you can see it. The Rotunda. We know Villa Rotonda by Palladio or Villa Capra. Now we have a Rotunda, but it's a Ford Rotunda, and yes, it's the Ford Media Center. Already the magic word, media. Let's reflect on what the media meant and means today. It rules the world. But then actually we have here one king, Ford, and the future king, media. And so there are here two kings, two royalties. Project was done later to cover it with this kind of geodesic dome. I don't know if Buckminster Fuller did it or not. But again, what is around it is the building by Albert Kahn. And here are the people working on it. The truth is that human beings, blind as they are capable of doing magnificent works. Astonishing things, actually. I keep thinking of the beautiful quotation from Paul Klee, one of the painters I admired the most, but who was also he was in a way more than a painter, although he was a great poet painter or painter poet, but he was very articulate and capable of formulating thoughts in an inviolable way. He said like this. He said, there are two mountains, the mountain of the animals They who do not know, they do not know. And the mountain of the gods, they who know, they know. And between these two mountains, it is the crepuscular valley of man. They who know, they do not know. But it is exactly because human beings know they do not know, they have a desire. Well, I'm not talking now about the Romanian students who don't seem to qualify for being in the crepuscular valley of man, as Paul Klee said. Those who know, they do not know. Unfortunately, what Klee thought doesn't seem to apply to us. But forget about this. In my opinion, it is exactly because we know we do not know, we want to know. We have an aspiration, a desire. As Nietzsche beautifully said, man as arrows of longing. I love this expression from Friedrich Nietzsche. The human being as an arrow of longing. You desire to, you long for something, for the horizon. In fact, for that very horizon that General Motors mentioned. Now, if you arrive at that horizon through imagination or through the car, you make the choice. But these people, it is true. It is my belief that despite the misery, despite the wars, despite the atrocities, human beings can do wonders. And you see them here struggling, putting together this geodesic dome above the rotunda, the Ford Rotunda. And it's just one example between many. This was published by Life magazine. You see the word Life in the lower right corner. Albert Kahn. Now industrial buildings, because yes, he built also industrial buildings, and some of them quite impressive. Look at this. Any great engineer and any great architect and any engineer and any architect, without being necessarily great, would say that this is an impressive building. It's outside and inside. It's an architecture that is architecture, built by Albert Kahn. Yes, the purpose was the same, to build cars in order to, reach the horizons. Doesn't matter how far away. And it doesn't matter, at that time, it didn't matter that, yes, for a car to run, you needed oil. I remember in a beautiful film by Ingmar Bergman, the film director, the Swedish film director I admire the most. There is a scene where a doctor arrives at a gas station, and the person there, responsible. I mean, he was the owner of the gas station. Fuels, feeds his car with gas, and the doctor wants to pay, and the man, the owner of the gas station, recognized him as being the doctor who at one time took care of someone in his family, and has said, you don't have to pay, doctor, because certain things cannot be paid even with gas. And I like the subtle irony of Ingmar Bergman. So certain things cannot be paid even with gas, which means gas is indeed very highly valued. And yes, without the cars, without the gas, what would you do? What do you see here? Cars emerging from the very modern, actually, facility built by the industrial architect, Albert Kahn. In fact, the building is much more modern than the car. The cars here have a definite, they can be easily, placed in a certain year, the year of their manufacturing. But the building, if you build such a building today, it would be fine. It would belong to the present. Look at them. Can you believe this picture? I mean, just look what's going on here. and we complain that the air is polluted. And this is, of course, I mean, please try to imagine the number of highways in this world and the numbers of cars in this world. I don't, I am tempted to exaggerate now, but I feel tempted to say that there are no such big numbers in our counting methods, that it's an infinite number. I mean, really, the cars took over the world. The highways took over the world. And one day this has to stop. Some wise countries started in that direction by returning to the bicycle. Personally, I think the bicycle is the vehicle of the future, but the manufacturers of the cars would never stop producing cars. They would rather die than stop producing cars. Look at them. They're beautiful, it's true, and they actually function. You have gasoline, you just feed the car, and here you go, towards the horizon. The problem is there are billions of people thinking in the same way, and billions of cars doing the same thing. And the earth is limited. It's not infinite. You know, the surface of the earth is measurable. It has a limit. So does the air that we breathe. It cannot take too much pollution. We invented now the electrical engine, but there, you cannot produce artificially energy without consuming something. So, you know, okay, we might replace gasoline, at least to an extent, but the problems will still arise unless the certain virus will force us to spend some more time in our rooms. On the other hand, I confess these buildings are impressive. Le Corbusier himself was an admirer of the huge industrial buildings of America. America, which names itself rather inappropriately as being America, as if South America is not America. This is North America, and in fact, it's not even North America, because Canada is also North America. Well, one thing is for sure, the United States is not America. It's part of North America. Anyway, going beyond this, I think the building is good. And even this one, wow, it shows power, it shows force, it shows centrality, it shows rhythm, it shows, you know, something that was always valued by architects and architecture. View of the principal and lateral facades of the test cells, United Aircraft Corporation, Pratt & Whitney Division Aircraft Assembly Plant, East Hartford, Connecticut. I would say I like this building. It's almost religious. It's a bulwark of resistance, but in its symmetry is impressive, you know, almost in a spiritual way. It's a little bit ominous because it has no windows, but please do not forget that Albert Kahn designed also the Victorian mansion for the fourth family that we saw. Would you have expected that he would design such a building? I would not have. Anyway, what is this? Yeah, the cover of a book on Albert Kahn in German, and the evolution of the factory, or maybe it's not in German, but it is, seems to be. Anyway, the factory building where the 20th century was born. This was the, you know, we can read that Kahn was responsible for a new thrust in the design of manufacturing fabrics. Or fabrics, no, I can see very well. The factory began to emerge as architecture as the architecture expressive of 20th century civilization. Then how come that this architect is not known more than, in my opinion, he deserves? So let's read. Albert Kahn's industrial architecture ranges between 1905 and 1942, a period in the United States animated by advanced labor struggles, grassroots activism, sabotages, and mass demonstrations for higher wages, better working conditions, and freedom of assembly. Anyway, the evolution of the factory, Albert Kahn. Now, sorry, here it is. I prepared this for a Romanian audience, and maybe we are only Romanians now here. După moartea sa, biroul său de arhitectură există în continuare. Iată una din lucrările lor recente. I will translate in case later on someone who doesn't know Romanian will have access to this. After his death, his office and his architecture continue to exist. And this is one of the recent works, the Detroit Zoo. And, you know, of course, it is a building which is in touch with the present, with our aesthetical interests and concerns. And we can say that the fact that the office of Albert Kahn is still alive and still producing buildings shows that his activity was not ignored, and you know, it seems to have relevance even today, although he died many years ago. Okay, and now we go to the second architect, different architect in many ways, Marcello Piacentini, an Italian and a very important architect himself. Was born on the 8th of December. So, Marcello Piacentini, happy birthday to you. Born in 1881, so he was a little bit younger than Albert Kahn. Let's read a little bit about him. Marcello Piacentini, as you can see, born December 8th and died in 1960, was an Italian urban theorist and one of the main proponents of Italian fascist architecture. Well, he was an urbanist or an urban theorist, but he was also an architect who built many buildings. Born in Rome, he was the son of architect Pio Piacentini. When he was only 26, he was commissioned to revamp of the historical center of Bergamo in 1907. Subsequently, he worked in most of Italy, but his best works are those commissioned by the fascist government in Rome. Piacentini devised a simplified neoclassicism. Well, strange formulation, but maybe, although neoclassicism itself is rather simple, but it's a simplified simplicity, if you want to say so, midway between the neoclassicism of the Novecento Italiano group, Gioponti and others. I don't know, I took this from Wikipedia, but I have some resistance here. Anyway, I will continue to read this text that I took from Wikipedia. And the rationalism of the group of seven of Giuseppe Terrani, Adalberto Libera, and others. Of course, we talked about Gioponti, and we'll talk about Giuseppe Terrani and Adalberto Libera. Important architects themselves. Adalberto Libera is known for the Malaparte building, although it's not very clear if he was the only author of that famous building. Apparently, Mr. Malaparte, because the name of the owner of the client was Malaparte, and it was constructed, you know, in relation, in opposite relation with Bonaparte. So Malaparte had a role in the planning, or the conceptual, at least, design of that famous villa, the Malaparte building. Anyway, but Adalberto Libera is considered also an author, if not the author of that building, and others. Anyway, his style, meaning Piacentini's style, became a mainstay of fascist architecture in Rome, including the new university campus, Università di Roma La Sapienza, from 1932, and the Eur district, of which he was not only designer, but also High Commissar by will of Benito Mussolini. His other works include the renovation of Brescia and Livorno, the Museo Nazionale della Magna Grecia in Reggio Calabria, the opening of Via della Conciliazione in Rome, and the restoration of the Rome Opera House, 1928-1958. Piacentini became an important colonial architect, particularly in Cyrenaica in eastern Libya. The style of his building is characteristic of the neo-Moorish period of Italian colonial architecture in Libya in the 1920s. This is evident in his Albergo Italia, as well as the Berenice Theatre in Benghazi. Piacentini was made project manager of all Italian building works in this place, whose name I'm not sure I can pronounce well, Cyrenaica. Anyway, sorry. He was also professor of urban planning at La Sapienza in Rome, of which he was also president. After the fall of the fascist regime, he did not work as architect for several years, and he died in Rome in 1960. So this was the man. I always wondered, how come that important artists, writers, intellectuals, architects sympathized with fascism? You know, there must have been something seductive. I mean, even Le Corbusier apparently had a certain sympathy or, understanding of the Vichy government in France, and this provoked his breaking apart from his cousin, Pierre Gendret, who refused to, negotiate with the Vichy government, but not Le Corbusier. Then we have, of course, Heidegger, or we have Knut Hamsun, the great Nobel Prize laureate or winner of Norwegian literature, truly a great writer. And I truly recommend to you a beautiful short book called Hunger by Knut Hamsun, and Stephen Hall built the museum, or a house for Knut Hamsun in Norway. Then there was André Derain, and so there were very interesting and capable, intelligent, talented artists and intellectuals, and in this case an architect, and they sympathized. I mean, not to talk about Giuseppe Terrani, right, or Libera, whom we just mentioned. They sympathized with Mussolini, they sympathized with fascism. And it's a subject which I think should be addressed, and the question should be asked. Now, look at his face. It's like a baby's face, When yes, his attire is rather grandiose and rhetorical, but his face is a baby boy, It's a mama's boy in a way. It's, you cannot imagine this man being a fascist, really. Look at his face, But he was. And even here, he looks like a bonhomme, a good man, a good man, a nice man, Anyway, drawings by Marcello Piacentini. Different drawings from the drawings of Albert Kahn, of course. He was not an industrial architect. Europe, more lyrical drawings, no 40 model, no. But we saw that Albert Kahn also was capable to accommodate in his works. We saw the Fischer building, right, with those incredible ornaments, but here we see this project for a theater that Marcello Piacentini designed, itself almost saturated with ornamentation, which later on he would give up. Architetto Marcello Piacentini, 1955. He was, you know, he was already 4 years before his death. We saw this one. Some buildings by Marcello Piacentini. Benghazi in Libya. Albergo Italia Hotel, known beforehand as Grande Albergo Roma, from 1913. What can we say? You know, a hotel with this sort of neoclassical, if we are to call it, architecture. Now, the Benghazi Central Railway Station, 1916. So this is Libya. Interesting tram car there, though. I wish I had a better picture. Now, from 1920, a villa and the park, Ague Terme Villa Ottolenghi, in 1920. This is an interesting work. And I think even by today's standards, aesthetical, I mean, this building is intriguing in a way. You know, I mean, the arches, yes, could refer to some historicism, but otherwise the building is modern. You know, it's almost done not too far away in time from where we are. We see that he already simplified his architectural language. Now I have a bad picture of this Berenice Theatre in Libya. Sorry, the spelling, the second I should have been on Y. If you can make abstraction of the I charta, you can see it behind the word. I don't know why some people would make such a thing, you know, take a picture, and then right in the center splash a big word like here again, you know, to ruin the picture. Now, Bolzano Victory Monument from 1926, 1928. 1928, the magical year when Le Corbusier built Villa Savoie. Surprise, surprise, you know, France is not so far away from Italy. But look at what monument Marcello Piacentini built that very year when Le Corbusier was building Villa Savoie. Built it, in fact. Anyway, a monument. On the other hand, earlier than this year, Antonio Santeglia made drawings for a monument which was built, I don't know exactly in what year, by, in fact, Giuseppe Terrani, based on the drawings of Santeglia, a futurist monument, much more modern than what we look at here. This is not a modern building. Anyway, although if you look at, you know, some in between the lines, so to speak, you see that this is a square, and there is almost a hidden simplicity. So in that sense, it is not totally anti-modern or not modern. But otherwise, you know, including the Latin wording and so on, reflects a preoccupation with a certain past. And already announcing the works he did for the Mussolini regime. I didn't know this was doing this interesting thing, this picture. But, in fact, I'm so seduced by it that I feel like contemplating it for a long time. Sorry about this. In fact, I don't even know why it moves so much, because it's not such a big change. Anyway, technology can be indeed seductive and magical. Brescia, Piazza della Vittoria. You can see the word victory is continuously pressing on us, you know, it's continuously present. 1927, 1932. Interesting things here, though, you know, I mean, he built also this big building, I think, but this one is not too bad. You know, I don't know exactly what function it has. On the other hand, the influence of the T model and Mr. Ford can be seen in Brescia as well. Italians also have great, you know, cars manufacturers, as we know. So Piacentini, I guess maybe he designed all the buildings around this square in Brescia before the Second World War with some years, around 1930. He loved arches, of course, and they culminate in the great building in Eur in Rome, which is all with arches covered. But even here, you can see arches at the bottom and everywhere. There are arches and arches and arches. But still, the building has a certain vigor and a certain, austerity almost, which often brings some nobility to architecture. Now, another building in Brescia, 1930, 1932. No, it's also there. We already saw it, but now I have other pictures with it. So it's very possible he designed several of the buildings, if not all the buildings around the square. So it's important to know that he designed this tower too, not just that building, which I like the most. Marcello Piacentini. Now, Genoa, again, Victoria, Arco della Vittoria, 1931. Lots of victories in Italy. I don't know what they were so proud of, but another triumphal arch. And I don't know what to say. I mean, yes, it is triumphal, and yes, it's well built and well envisioned, but I'm not very sure what was the reason for so much triumphalism. I should know better history, in other words. I confess, I don't know the reason for so much splendor, in envisioning and building triumphal arches. Jerusalem, Generali building, 1934, 1935. So he arrived also in Jerusalem. Is this building built for a company, an Italian company, Generali building? I don't know. I mean, perhaps the only, striking thing he has the lion at the top. Otherwise, the building, it is as it is. Anyway, he built also in Jerusalem. Surprise, surprise. It's an insurance company, Assicurazioni. That will do. And of course, the lion makes complete sense now, right? They rule the world, the insurance companies. They are the lions of human life now in capitalism. Reggio Calabria, Museo Nazionale della Magna Grecia, 1932-1941. Not very impressive, this building. His colleagues, so to speak, Giuseppe Terrani and Alberto Libera, were, I think, more interesting because they assumed levels of modernity that Piacentini didn't want to arrive at, but will arrive at his buildings in Rome, and some of them are impressive. More than this building, I would say, which I don't like too much because it's too monolithic, and maybe there are some interesting things, but all in all, it's a building without too much grace. I imagine this glass ceiling was built more recently. This reminds me a little bit of the architecture of Ungers, the German architect, himself an interesting architect. Now we arrive at the church, which I lived for a while in Rome, and I wish I saw it, and I didn't. Now I regret, but it's not a bad building. Church of Sacro Cuore di Cristo Re, 1920-1934. Marcello Piacentini. I think in its simplicity and its symmetry, it does have force. Well, that is if we accept force to be expressed by a church. It should have, but also grace. I think it's not a bad building, and even the interior, monumental as it is, and perfectly symmetrical, does have something to say, I would say, architecturally. It's not an architecture that we would easily associate with modern times, but it's not a building to dismiss, in my opinion. Now, of course, Mr. Ford, with his invention, is all around the church, everywhere in the world. Even if produced not by General Motors, by Fiat, or who knows what other company. The plan of the building is not excessively modern at all, but traces of simplification with which modernity used to be associated are here to be seen. Marcello Piacentini, Roma, Rome. Now, Teatro dell'Opera di Roma, 1926-1928. Another building which makes me think that I am actually not in Italy, but in Libya. The interior surprisingly, opulent and almost Baroque. Anyway, it's a theater, so I guess it has to be so, but the main elevation doesn't announce in any way what we see here. So this is in Rome. Marcello Piacentini, but he only restored the building. So now the planning for Sapienza University of Rome, of the Rome campus, 1935. That's where the architecture school is too. And yeah, it's an architecture that is announcing his works in Eur. I was with some students from Bucharest in Rome, and we went to see Eur, and we'll arrive there very soon. And we entered the church there. It was not designed by Piacentini, Marcello Piacentini. I don't know who designed it. And we, took a rest inside the church. We took a seat there. And when we exited, I asked the students what they felt. There were only female students, and they all said that they felt very uncomfortable, that was not a church, and that it didn't feel like a church, and they felt that it was something almost devilish in that church because it was very cold and abstract, and it was a fascist church, but a very interesting church. But it was very interesting, the reaction of the students. They were, I think they were shocked, because the church was so very different from the atmosphere in Orthodox church in our country. Anyway, this is Sapienza by Marcello Piacentini, who did also the site planning, the University of Rome. And now we arrive at Via della Conciliazione, 1936-1950. He worked on this, and you see here, beginning on the left and the right, the well-known colonnade of Bernini. And yesterday was his birthday, Gian Lorenzo Bernini. And of course, in this direction, not far away, is San Pietro, the center of Christianity in a way. So He worked on this via, Marcello Piacentini. Here we see the mausoleum of the Emperor Adrian, great building itself. And I think, I'm not sure if these sculptures on this bridge are not also by Bernini. Anyway, a very important location, of course, in Rome. And here we look at the San Pietro. Yeah, yesterday I showed the baldachin of Bernini inside San Pietro. Well, Piacentini didn't work on San Pietro, but he worked on this Via della Conciliazione. Rome, planning for the Our district, and he was the main person responsible for this planning, commissioned as he was by Mussolini. And it's an experiment. It's you know, a new city within an old city, and the old city is Rome, the city that all roads converge towards. So the Our district of Rome, the interrupted dream of Benito Mussolini. In the 1930s, Benito Mussolini dreamt of celebrating 20 years of fascism with the opening of a grand new city center in what is now known as the Our district of Rome. The vision of the Our district of Rome started with a proposal from the governor of Rome, who wanted to host the World's Fair in 1942. We saw the World's Fair from 1939 in New York City, and we saw the Futurama by Albert Kahn. Mussolini liked the idea and saw it as an opportunity to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the March on Rome and the beginning of the fascist era. And for this purpose, he wanted to build a shining new city of permanent buildings designed by the most preeminent Italian architects available. With green recreational areas, modern infrastructure, and monumental buildings, the new city center should last eternally. Well, what is eternal? After all, a few years later, we know what happened. Second World War, as an updated version of the Rome's historic center. Here I would say something that, isn't it striking that two partners in crime, actually, so to speak, Hitler and Mussolini, had different visions about how their, you know, beloved cities had to have their architecture. Hitler commissioned Albert Speer to design Berlin in a kind of a neoclassical architecture. Some kind of neoclassicism exists in Italy too, but I would say it's much more modern, more luminous. Maybe this was essentially the difference between the German spirit and the Italian spirit. I don't know, but I think some parallel should be made, and probably it was already made, between architecture under Hitler and architecture under Mussolini. An autonomous agency called E42, Esposizione 1942, was formed to drive the project. The agency, owned jointly by the municipality of Rome and the Ministry of Economy, later changed its name to EUR as an abbreviation for Esposizione Universale Roma. So the three letters EUR they are the initials of Esposizione Universale Roma. And they started to develop an area of 4 kilometers square in the southwestern outskirts of Rome, with the help of such architects as Marcello Piacentini, who also designed Il Torione in Brescia, we saw it, and the rationalist Giuseppe Pagano Pogacnik. This is the building, famous building of the Our section of Rome, designed by Piacentini. We already noticed his love of arches. Now the arches go all the way to the top. And I don't know if he was responsible also for this obelisk. Yes, I'm glad I have other pictures with this building. It is in a way impressive, you know, it's some kind of a mixture between rationalism and some kind of a historicism. There is monumentality here, genuine monumentality, but it's looking at it, you almost unavoidably welcome the liberating, although also at times disorienting freedom that genuine modernity brought in. Yet we cannot deny, you know, a certain seduction that such a building could generate. Also, you know, I keep complaining, why is it that we don't bring sculptures to our architecture? Well, here we have statues, we have sculpture, we have sculptures here, you know, at the bottom, not at the top, like in the buildings of Andrea Palladio, but maybe strangely at the bottom. This is also perhaps something worth discussing. Why is it that they are not at the top? Like in the case, not just Palladio, but I'm thinking now mainly of Palladio, and they are at the bottom. Although this statue is rather dramatic, and there are beautiful pictures of it, this is, I don't know if it's one of the most beautiful, but you can see the dialectics, the tension almost between the statue and the building. It was a monumental effort. They really took their role seriously. They wanted to show the world the magnificence of fascism and its vision and, you know, its power to accomplish. But, you know, Piacentini obviously didn't think that, you know, after the war, he would be forced to be inactive as an architect and died in 1960. You know, as an architect who didn't matter any longer, actually. Palazzo dei Congressi. Although he worked with, and we are going to end this presentation with a building he built together with Pierluigi Nervi, a sports arena or palace, which is very important for architecture, and there is even a model of it in the hallways of the University of Architecture in Bucharest. But let's look now at the Palazzo dei Congressi. Is this building here, and here there is a balcony from which perhaps, you know, the leader, the Führer, Il Duce himself was supposed to address the populace, maybe. I don't know. Or is it not a balcony? I don't know. I thought it was a balcony, but maybe it's not. But it should be. What other reason should justify this thing here? Anyway, I hope I have images also from the inside, because the inside there are exhibitions now, you know, avant-garde shows inside the Palazzo dei Congressi that, you know, Mussolini built through this architect, Marcello Piacentini. Now I don't have, I have in another presentation, but not here. Rome, Albergo degli Ambasciatori in Via Veneto. This is a different kind of building. I almost feel tempted to say that he just restored an existing building. You see, he was, you know, affected by historicism, and but it's such a difference from this building and the previous one. That I mean, look, even these buildings and this one, and yet we arrive here where it's almost an eclectic architecture of the 19th century. Maybe it was an existing building. I don't know. And here they are. Here you see Mussolini with the architect on his right. Both very confident, well, more Il Duce, more the political leader than the architect. But would they have imagined what was going to happen not much later? I don't think they did. Here is again Il Duce, Mussolini with the architect, of course, the architect explaining to him properly how things were going to happen and so on. I like the hat, though, of Il Duce, rather romantic and bohemian. You know, the fragility of human affairs is a reality. We don't know. We don't know what would happen and what will happen. And what can we say? It's very sad when you know, a positive, you know, constructive activity is, you know, suspended because of the tragedy we call war. Even if we might not agree necessarily with the architecture they were building, but if we compare it with the misery of war, with the death of so many people, we can only say they better continue building instead of starting wars and promoting wars. Otherwise, you know, this picture is, I don't know a lot about politics, but looking at the picture and looking at Mussolini and looking at Piacentini, you feel that somehow, you know, there is some kind of a dialogue here, and that the political leader, I mean, I even like the fact that he is placing his hands in his pockets like this, rather like an artist or a poet would do, not the political leader of Italy. Maybe he had an artistic side, maybe because all Italians have an artistic side. It's in the DNA, so to speak. Actually, he looks more like an artist than the architect. Anyway, look, you can contemplate a little bit their shoes too, even if the picture is not very clear. And here they are again, Mussolini on the right, and on his right, Marcello Piacentini, and some people having fun behind, not anticipating what was going to happen. The leader himself died in you know, miserably, sadly. What can we say? You know, the fatalities of human history. Marcello Piacentini, Architettura e Potere, una biografia. Now, Sao Paulo, Matarazzo building, 1939. So we are now in Brazil. He built a building there too. And yeah, it's okay, no? You know, it's an okay building, whatever the word okay might mean in this case. Why not? It could have been built by Albert Kahn, right? Well, it was built by Piacentini. Sao Paulo, Brazil. A lot of trees at the top. Now I imagine these trees were brought up upstairs, rather in the present. This became the fashion now to remove the trees from the earth they were born from, and to put them on buildings, on balconies, everywhere, because we are exasperated. Why? Because the invention of the friend of Albert Kahn, Mr. Ford, filled the earth with gasoline consuming cars. And now we have to recuperate some of the oxygen that disappeared and the ozone layer with climbing our buildings with trees and bushes and all kinds of vegetation in an exasperated you know, effort. Rome, Teatro Sistina, 1946-1949, a little work after the war. Obviously, he didn't have any longer glorious commissions. Italy was defeated, and implicitly Marcello Piacentini was defeated too. He lost. He lost because it happened that he was associated with those who lost the war. Although in a war everybody loses, the so-called winners lose too. There are no winners in a war, they all lose. Capella Universitaria Divina Sapienza is a chapel in Rome, 1947-1952. It's not an uninteresting building somehow, you know. But then the word interesting doesn't really mean a lot. Usually, I myself, you know, we use the word interesting when we ran out of words. So then we say it's interesting. But what does that truly mean, interesting? I don't know very well how to describe this. It's somehow a burlesque classicism. It's, yeah, it's almost a classicism which says, don't take me too seriously, even if I am a chapel. And a chapel it is. What is interesting though, and you wouldn't expect it, you would expect it's a cylinder. It's actually an ellipse. Yeah. Ferrara, Nuovo Palazzo della Ragione, 1954-1956. Here the arches are different. The arches have some Gothic or Middle Ages longings. But otherwise, what can we say? And we arrive at the last work that I present tonight is the Palazzo dello Sport from 1960s, the year when he died. He did it together with Pierluigi Nervi. Actually, many people know, myself included, that actually it was Nervi who was the author, but apparently Piacentini collaborated with Nervi and they built it together in 1960. And as I said, a model of this building is in the hallways of of the University of Architecture in Bucharest. It's a good work. It's specifically from an engineer's point of view, but an engineer who had Nervi had in a legitimate way longings for being an architect, and he was. In his best works, he was more than an engineer. Whatever Walter Gropius might have said with his maliciousness, he said architecture begins where engineering ends. Well, in this case, it's not true. Architecture began when engineering didn't end. So they kind of collaborated and worked together, architecture and engineering. Just like in that famous sketch or drawing by Le Corbusier, where you have two hands intertwined and both representing the act of building, the engineer and the architect collaborating closely. Here we have Nervi and Piacentini doing this work, and it received some modifications lately. At one time it was rather in bad shape, but I don't know if I have pictures with that period in the life of this building. Here we see pictures during its construction. So it was 1960, as I read, and just like we remember those pictures with those men on that geodesic dome at that rotunda built by Albert Kahn for Ford. Here we also see these people on top of the roof of the building that was very, interestingly resolved structurally by Pierluigi Nervi. A great engineer who also was the I think he was the initiator. I don't know exactly how to describe him, but in my knowledge, the best history of architecture in 18 volumes was published under his leadership. That is the World History of Architecture. And it's true, in my knowledge, the best encyclopedic presentation of architecture from all times, starting with what is called primitive architecture, which is actually, in my opinion, the most interesting volume, and I have it. This set can be found, and not too expensively, republished by Electa and Rizzoli, and it's in English, translated. But look at the beautiful, structural elements. Nervi was excellent in doing this sort of thing, because who would say that this is not an architect? And this is not the work of Piacentini. This is the work of Nervi. We saw what Piacentini did. He did arches. This is the audacity of the engineer, the aesthetical audacity of the engineer in this case, not the architect. This is how it was, framed, so to speak, by this glass enclosure lately. In my opinion, they killed the building, because the building was much better before, because you would see the structure, you see this, which now you don't see, and it's a different building. I don't know what happened to the Italians. Yes, now they have these projections here and whatever, but I read at Cathedral de Notre Dame, someone sarcastically made a proposal. I read, in fact, today, to transform it into a disco, because apparently there is a tendency now to restore the La Cathédrale de Notre Dame in Paris in the spirit of making it friendly, so-called user-friendly for tourists. And from here to transform it into a disco is perhaps not such a long distance. And we look now at the building by Nervi, what it became in the recent years. Yes, maybe some people would call this progress. I don't know. I think perhaps we should have a discussion about this. I wonder what Nervi would have thought of it, and maybe even Piacentini. The structure of the building is beautiful inside, but I'm not sure where this is. Is it maybe another part of the building, or I don't understand, because it seems actually as if there are two different buildings. Now I'm confused. Anyway, this is the original roofing of the building designed by, I would say, mainly Nervi. And in fact, the building was finalized with Nervi being alive. Piacentini died in 1960. Technology was brought in, of course, there is some kind of modernization of the building, but you can still see the very fine engineering work that is the work of Nervi. That's it. And let's wish happy birthday to Marcello Piacentini, even if he collaborated with Benito Mussolini, the Bohemian-looking fascist leader.